God damn, is this ever gonna end?
Control, this is Delta. Go ahead.
I'm detecting seismic activity inside the house. There might be locust tunnels inside.
Copy that, Anya. We are aware.
Woo! Yeah, baby! What's up, ladies?
Nobody is impervious to making incorrect prejudgments about a piece of media. Just a few weeks ago, I was pleasantly surprised to discover that I've been believing my own inaccurate judgment of a game for the last 13 years, and that stupid prejudice has prevented me from being able to enjoy what I would now call a very, very good game. This week in the Court of Appeals, I'll be taking a look back at my own mistakes when it comes to Gears of War. Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to LegalSpeak, a Cold North production. I'm the Law Morris, and this is the video essay series in which I get to talk about the games I've been playing and what I think of the medium as a whole. You can find everything we do all in one spot over at coldnorthpro.com, and that includes our gaming podcast, HardReset, and our movies podcast, NoRefunds, the podcast that watches bad movies so you don't have to. If you like what we do, and if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe for new content every week. Now, let's talk some Gears of War. Now, for transparency's sake, I didn't actually play the original version of Gears of War. I played the Ultimate Edition made for the Xbox One on my Xbox One X. I'm going to talk a little bit about that briefly at the end of this video, and I also want to say I am fully aware that I've been the asshole in this situation, and this video is going to be me eating, well, a gigantic plate of crow. I've been a nerd my entire life, and not the cool hip kind of nerd with sleeve tattoos that wears oil in his beard and sips on a latte. I've always been the nerdy kind of nerd that wants to talk about the deep lore of the interloper theory of the Zelda timeline and really expects everyone to have their computer specs memorized just in case a conversation should come up where we can discuss them, whip them out, measure them. So naturally, when Gears of War was announced at E3 2005, featuring those meaty, no-neck soldiers, I really wrote it off as a game that was shallow and marketed at jocks that probably weren't even going to buy an Xbox 360. And I hate to say it, but I held that opinion for a really long time, like way too long. It wasn't until Gears 4 came out that I started to be a bit intrigued by the series, and after the latest Gears 5 trailer, I was ready to set my preconceived notions aside and see what this series had to offer. Gears of War is a superb experience in so many ways, and even in the places where it's not at the top of its game, it's still completely competent. Gameplay, characters, story, and setting are all excellent, and with pacing that is some of the best I've ever seen in a game, even in 2019, this 2006 title stands up to its contemporaries. While they didn't invent the cover-based shooting mechanic that the game relies on so heavily, Epic did do it better than anyone had previously, and honestly, arguably better than anyone has since, except maybe Uncharted. Combat scenarios are all extremely well measured and offer incredible variety while utilizing the gameplay driven by what is essentially one gigantic mechanic. Epic pushes the player into different circumstances that force them to tackle challenges in one of several ways. Throughout the game, you're faced with wide open environments with tons of cover point that kind of act as though they're like a blank canvas. And you can really approach the fight in any way you want. You also get some narrow corridors with very linear cover points. So you're moving from A to B to C that really force the player to address swaths of enemies with limited space. Very claustrophobic. And there are multiple pathways that allow for flanking, and you can, if you want, just do an all-out assault and go straight down the middle. Not recommended. And even explicit choices for the player to make that take the player into one of two totally different scenarios. Gears offers collectibles off the beaten path that, in my opinion, don't really offer much of reward, but also they're so close to the critical path that really the hunt was enough of a reward in and of itself. And some light puzzle solving. Now, I know that I use the term loosely, but there is some light puzzle solving. My favorite being a room that is comprised of 2 levels, the top level being a maze in which the floor breaks loose, dropping the player down to the bottom level, where they're swarmed with the tiny enemies that explode. They explode real easy. I'm really sorry I didn't take the time to, during the game, to memorize what each enemy type is called. And all of this is accompanied by tight controls and excellent gunplay with some really great shooting mechanics to make the moment-to-moment gameplay fast-paced and very satisfying. I've heard that the story and characters are excellent in the later games, and I really hope they develop more in 2, 3, and 4. But from what I saw in this game, there wasn't really anything wrong with the characters, except General Ram, but there wasn't really anything remarkable about them either. The 4 main characters exhibit quite a bit of very unique personality that I enjoyed, but they lack any meaningful backstory to make me more invested in their journey, preventing them from having any substantial development. Why was Marcus in prison at the start of the game aside from a really cool prison break scene? How long has it been since Marcus and Dom worked together last? How did Coltrane go from a career as a professional football player to an elite soldier? And what drives Baird to be such a cocky prick all the time? All these characters are likable, and they all have seeds of a backstory planted, but no backstory is developed in the first game. Where all the protagonists are good, but missing something, making them great, the villain is bad, missing something making him even okay. General Ram has no personality, no clear motivation, and almost no presence in the story. As the game progresses, it's made clear that Ram is the big bad guy that the player is going to fight at the end of the game, but there really is so little engagement with Ram throughout the game that he might as well have been a faceless, nameless boss fight at the end. The final fight of the game is fun, and from a gameplay perspective, very cool, but from a story perspective, it feels hollow. And I think that that's because there wasn't any reward earned in finally just kicking Ram's teeth in. Where the game shines brightest is in the pacing. The player is never doing the same thing for too long, and the game keeps the player moving from one scenario to the next at a relatively quick clip, offering a real sense of progress in what is a pretty short amount of time. The core experience of cover-based shooting in any given environment is excellent, and the variations on that experience, like I mentioned before, keep that core experience from ever feeling stale. But the devs never wanted the player to be playing any variation of that same core experience for too long, so they mix it up. Minecart segments, puzzles, defend the point segments, a driving segment, they all really culminate into what is incredibly fluid and cohesive experience that's really, really hard to put down. Now, if I had to choose anything to criticize the game for, it would be the difficulty spikes. Towards the end of the game, there are some major boss fights that I was forced to strong arm via trial and error until I figured them out. Fighting the giant locust dinosaur at the end, why wouldn't I head for the nearest cover point? The game has been teaching me to do that and just head for cover, start shooting the entire game. But that always led the boss straight into a very small enclosed area where I had no hope for escape. And the final boss fight with General Ram, I hadn't seen the Krill since the second act of the game, where the contrast between light and dark was much, much more apparent, but it took me several attempts before I even noticed that there were lights offering cover. Then a few more after that, before I was able to beat the boss. The game features some really stellar gameplay, but leaves quite a bit to be desired when it comes to balancing the bosses. And I mentioned at the beginning of this video that I would be addressing the Ultimate Edition. So here we go. My experience with the original version of this game is so limited and so far in the past that I really have no meaningful point of reference to go off of. But the quality of life improvements and the Xbox One graphics made the game much more approachable than it would have been had I had to play the 2006 version via backwards compatibility. Visuals were sharp and enjoyable, and although I hadn't played the original version for more than an hour, like 10 plus years ago, I could very easily tell that they had toned down the nearly sepia tone of that version quite a bit for the Ultimate Edition. The Ultimate Edition was a really cool thing to look at because it was so faithful to the original in animations and character models, but differed wildly in the level of detail, lighting effects, and draw distances that it made it look distinctly like something I haven't seen in 6 years. Because I have no frame of reference, I can't look at the game and say the usual, oh, it looks the way I remember the 360 version looking. And instead I'm left with, it looks the way I remember 360 games looking, which is odd. I felt almost teleported back to 2005 when I first played the 360 after waiting in line for 45 minutes the day EB Games got their demo 360 console, like maybe a month or two before release. Needless to say, if there was some magic machine I could put all my 360 games into to make them look the way I remember games of that generation looking, I would be able to die happy. That would be awesome. So overall, the lesson I learned while playing Gears of War is simple. Don't be a judgmental dick. anyone is capable of judging anyone else in a premature and unfair way. And because I was unable to see past my own bias, I missed out on a really good game for 13 years. Gears of War is awesome, and when played in a contemporary setting, it has its shortcomings, sure, but it can definitely stand up to the best of whatever 2019 has to offer. If you're like me, and you haven't played Gears of War because you're a lonely little prick clinging to some pathetic means of self-identity based off meaningless shit, just go play the fucking game. You'll really enjoy it. Have you ever prejudged a game and later found out how awesome it is? Let me know in the comments down below. I really would like to hear that. And while you're down there, don't forget to hit that like button and the subscribe button for more content out of my face every week. The face thing is new, so we'll see how this goes. Now that's all I have for you today, but check out our website, coldnorthpro.com, for everything we do all in one spot. I'll be back next week, and frankly, I don't know what I'm going to be talking about next week. So until then, just go play some games.